A millionaire was visiting his late wife's grave when he accidentally discovered two strange boys also bringing flowers to pay their respects. But when he approached to ask, he was shocked to hear them calling his wife Mom. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls of Adam Patterson's office. The soft hum of traffic below barely reached him, the world outside moving forward while he remained tethered to a past he couldn't escape. Sunlight filtered through the tinted windows, casting long shadows across the dark oak desk, cluttered with neatly stacked documents and an untouched cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingertips pressing against his temples. The day had arrived again. 10 years. A decade since the accident. A decade since Eleanor. The world saw him as a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. But in moments like these, when silence weighed heavier than the loudest boardroom arguments, he felt like a man who had lost the only thing that truly mattered. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His secretary, Laura, stepped in with a bouquet of white lilies, wrapped meticulously in silver paper. "I figured you'd want these," she said, placing them gently on his desk. "Your car is ready whenever you are." Adam didn't immediately respond. He stared at the flowers, his jaw tightening. White lilies. Eleanor's favorite. He had brought them to her every anniversary, every birthday, every day that should have been theirs, but wasn't. After a beat, he nodded. "Thank you, Laura." His voice came out steadier than he expected. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether to say something more, then simply gave a small, understanding nod before exiting, leaving him alone once again. Moments later, Adam stepped into the sleek black sedan, waiting for him downstairs. The driver didn't ask for a destination. He knew. The routine had been the same for 10 years. As the car pulled away from the towering glass building, Adam turned his gaze toward the city flashing past, yet his mind was far from the streets and high-rises. It was in that house and in that life before everything had been stripped away. He could still hear her laughter echoing down the hallway of their home. I could still picture her standing barefoot in the kitchen, humming absent-mindedly while making coffee. I could still feel the warmth of her touch, the way her hand would absent-mindedly reach for his when they sat together, as if holding on to him was second nature. And then, just as easily, those memories were eclipsed by the cold, sterile scent of a hospital corridor, by the voice of a doctor he barely remembered, delivering words that had fractured him. The car slowed as they neared the cemetery gates. The wrought iron entrance loomed ahead, a familiar, unwelcome sight. The driver parked, and Adam stepped out, his grip tightening around the bouquet. He made his way through the rows of headstones, past names he didn't recognize, past markers of lives he had never known, until he reached her. Eleanor Patterson, beloved wife, forever missed. Kneeling, he placed the lilies at the base of the stone, smoothing out the paper before letting out a slow breath. His fingers traced the letters of her name the way they always did. The words caught in his throat before they could form. He had spent years perfecting this moment. Come, sit, talk, leave. But today, like every year before, it still felt like he was standing at the edge of a wound that had never truly healed. The cemetery was quiet, save for the distant rustle of trees, and then, from behind him, the sound of footsteps. Not the slow, weary steps of another visitor, but something lighter, uncertain. He turned his head slightly, expecting a passerby. Instead, he saw two boys. They weren't there by accident. They walked toward Eleanor's grave with purpose, each carrying a small bouquet of flowers, their expressions unreadable, yet strangely solemn. And then, as they knelt before the stone, one of them whispered a word that sent a chill through Adam's bones. Mother. Adam's entire body stiffened. The cemetery, the cold air, the distant sounds of leaves rustling in the wind, all of it faded into the background. The boys had spoken as if it were fact, as if the woman buried beneath this stone had given them life. "That's not possible," he found himself saying, the words slipping from his lips before he could consider them. The streetlights flickered as the wind picked up, rustling the brittle autumn leaves along the cemetery pathway. Adam remained still, the cool night air pressing against his skin, yet the chill that ran down his spine had nothing to do with the temperature. He looked at the two boys kneeling before Eleanor's grave, their hands gripping their small bouquets as if they carried something heavier than flowers. The silence between them stretched, thick and uneasy. Adam's fingers curled into his palms, his chest tightening as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be true. His voice, when it finally emerged, was quieter than he expected. "Who are you?" The boys flinched at the directness of his tone. The taller one, his hair slightly messier, his eyes flickering with something cautious, glanced at the other before speaking. "I'm Jason," he said, then motioned to the boy beside him. "And this is my brother Mason." Adam nodded slightly, though it did nothing to settle the growing storm inside him. The names were unfamiliar, but their faces... He swallowed, his throat dry. "Why are you here?" Mason shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twisted around the paper of the bouquet, as if searching for an answer in the delicate petals. "We came to see our mother," he said softly. The words struck like a sharp, unexpected blow. Adam took an involuntary step back, his pulse hammering against his temples. His gaze darted to the tombstone again, as if the inscription might somehow change, as if it might provide clarity where none existed. "That's not possible," he said, measured but firm. "Eleanor..." He hesitated, inhaling deeply before forcing himself to continue. "Eleanor was my wife. She died 10 years ago." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, but he pushed through. "She didn't have children." Jason and Mason exchanged glances, the certainty in their eyes flickering into something more fragile. Mason bit his lip. "But Grandma told us..." "Who is your grandmother?" Adam interrupted, the tension in his chest coiling tighter. The boys hesitated, and for the first time, Adam saw something more than confusion in their expressions. Reluctance. Jason was the first to respond. "Violet." The name meant nothing to Adam, yet the weight of it in their voices told him it should. He took another slow breath, grounding himself. "And Violet told you Eleanor was your mother?" Mason nodded, though it was less certain than before. "She said our mum loved us very much." A lump formed in Adam's throat. He couldn't do this here, not in front of Eleanor's grave, not with the ground beneath his feet feeling as unsteady as his thoughts. He looked at the boys again, studying them, searching for something, a lie, a mistake, an answer. But all he saw were two children standing in front of his wife's grave, believing she was theirs. His next words came out more forcefully than he intended. "Take me to her." Jason and Mason stiffened. Jason, in particular, seemed more wary now, his eyes scanning Adam's face as if trying to gauge whether this was a mistake. The hesitation was clear. They didn't want to involve her. But Adam wasn't about to let this slip away. "If there's been some misunderstanding, we need to clear it up," he continued, though the words felt brittle in his mouth. "If she told you Eleanor was your mother, I need to know why." The boys remained quiet, and Adam realized they weren't just hesitant, they were protective. Of Violet? Of themselves? He wasn't sure, but something in their body language told him they weren't used to trusting strangers. "Listen," Adam said, lowering his voice, though the urgency remained. "I just want the truth." Mason looked up at Jason, waiting for his brother to decide. Jason hesitated a beat longer, before finally nodding. "Okay," he murmured, "but you have to promise you won't get mad." Adam clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly. "I just want answers." That seemed to be enough. Jason nodded again, then turned to Mason. Without another word, they started walking, leading Adam toward the cemetery gates. The drive was quiet. Adam gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather as he stole glances at them through the rearview mirror. They sat stiffly in the back seat, their hands resting in their laps, their expressions unreadable. He couldn't stop looking at them. It wasn't just their resemblance to him, it was the way they carried themselves, the way Jason's brow furrowed ever so slightly when he was thinking, the way Mason glanced at his brother for reassurance. It was something deeper than appearance, something unsettlingly familiar. Adam forced his eyes back to the road, gripping the wheel tighter. The city lights blurred past as they drove, but inside the car, the weight of the unknown pressed down like a stone. Adam Patterson had spent years living in certainty, in control. But tonight, everything he knew had begun to unravel. The hum of the engine was the only sound filling the car, steady and low. Yet to Adam, it felt deafening against the chaos unraveling inside his mind. His fingers remained tense on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening with each passing second. The boys sat quietly in the back, their small frames barely shifting, their presence a silent weight pressing against him. He cleared his throat, the question forming before he could stop it. "How old are you?" The boys exchanged a glance, then, in unison, answered, 10. Adam's grip tightened on the wheel. A cold ripple ran through him, settling deep in his chest. 10 years, the exact number of years since Eleanor had died. The timeline struck him with precision, sharp and undeniable. His jaw tensed. "Are you okay, sir?" Jason's voice was quiet, hesitant, like he already knew the answer. Adam inhaled slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the road. "I'm fine." The words felt like a lie. The streetlights flickered past, illuminating patches of pavement before plunging them back into darkness. He stole another glance in the rearview mirror. Jason's gaze was fixed on him, studying him with a sharpness beyond his years. Mason, however, was turned toward the window, his fingers pressing lightly against the glass, lost in his own thoughts. Adam had never believed in fate. He had built his success on logic, control, and carefully measured choices. Yet, two boys with his face, his blood, his wife's name on their lips, sitting in his car on this night of all nights. That was something no calculation could explain. They pulled up in front of a small, worn-down house, tucked into the outskirts of the city. The porch light flickered, casting a dim, uneven glow. Adam barely had time to put the car in park before Jason opened the door and stepped out. Mason followed, both moving without hesitation, as if they'd been here countless times before. Adam took a breath, then pushed open his own door. He straightened his jacket, squaring his shoulders as he followed them up the steps. The wood creaked beneath his weight. The air smelled faintly of rain and old earth. Jason knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened just enough to reveal a woman in her mid-50s. Short silver strands framed a face marked by time, her sharp eyes flickering between the two boys before settling on Adam. She knew. It was in the way she inhaled, sharp but controlled, the way her fingers curled slightly against the doorframe. There was no surprise, only something guarded, something she had prepared for. Adam stared at her, feeling an inexplicable pressure in his chest. "Violet," he said, the name foreign on his tongue. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pushed the door open wider. "You should come inside." The boys stepped in first, moving easily through the dimly lit living room. Adam followed, his eyes sweeping across the small but well-kept space. Old photographs sat on the mantel, a faint smell of chamomile tea lingering in the air. The atmosphere was warm, lived in, yet as he stood there, it felt stifling. Violet closed the door behind them, moving with slow deliberation before turning to face him fully. "You have questions." Adam's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I don't have questions. I have a demand." His voice was measured, but the restraint was slipping. "You're going to tell me exactly why two boys who look just like me, who claim Eleanor was their mother, have been living under your care for the past 10 years. Violet exhaled, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Jason and Mason, then motioned toward the worn couch. "Sit down." Adam remained standing. "I don't need to sit." Her gaze met his, firm but not unkind. "You will." Something in her tone made Jason and Mason exchange a wary glance. They hesitated before settling onto the armchair nearby, silent observers. Violet lowered herself into a chair across from Adam, folding her hands in her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I was a nurse," she began. "A long time ago." Adam's breath came slower. "I was working the night Eleanor Patterson was brought into the hospital." The world tilted slightly beneath him. Violet continued, her voice distant, as if recalling something buried deep. "She was in critical condition, a car accident. The doctors did everything they could, but she was barely holding on. Then, after the emergency surgery, the official report came." She paused, her throat tightening. It was announced that all three had died. The words slammed into Adam like a blow to the chest. His breath caught. "3?" Violet nodded. "Eleanor, and the two babies she carried." He felt his legs weaken. His mind refused to process it. "But that wasn't the truth," Violet said, her voice shaking slightly now. "Because I saw something that night. Something I wasn't supposed to." Adam remained motionless, every muscle in his body wound tight. "The doctor in charge, Carl Rodriguez, he took something from that operating room." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "A black bag." The room seemed to shrink. "I followed him," Violet continued, her face paling with the memory. "My gut told me something was wrong, so I waited. I watched. He left the hospital under the cover of night, took the bag with him. And then, hours later, I saw him drive to the outskirts of town, near the woods." Adam's heart pounded. What was in the bag? Violet lifted her eyes to his, and for the first time, her control faltered. "Your sons." The silence that followed was suffocating. Violet's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "He buried them, in a shallow grave, like they were nothing. I waited until he was gone, then I dug them out with my own hands. They were so small, so cold, but they were breathing." Adam couldn't move. The walls around him seemed to close in, his mind unable to process the weight of her words. He had spent 10 years mourning the children he thought had never lived, and now 2 boys sat just feet away from him, their eyes filled with questions they hadn't even begun to ask. His sons, alive. The room seemed smaller now, the walls pressing in, as Adam struggled to reconcile reality with the impossible. His fingers dug into the fabric of his pants, tension coiled tightly in his body, his breaths shallow and uneven. Jason and Mason shifted in their seats, their small frames tense with an awareness they shouldn't have had to carry. His sons. For 10 years, he had mourned them, believing they had never drawn breath, never opened their eyes, and never existed beyond the moment of loss. And yet, they sat before him, alive. He turned to Violet, his voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a blade. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands clasped together in her lap. "I was afraid," she said, simply. Adam let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head as he ran a hand through his hair. "Afraid of what? That I wouldn't want them. That I wouldn't take responsibility for my own sons." His voice rose, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Violet's gaze remained steady. "I was afraid for them. And for myself," she admitted, her voice firm, but not defensive. "I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. If I had spoken up, I don't know what Carl or the people backing him would have done. I had 2 newborns who had just survived the impossible. My only thought was keeping them safe." Adam clenched his jaw, a war waging inside him. He wanted to shout, to demand why she had stolen his chance to raise them, and why she had let him suffer a decade of grief. But then, his eyes flickered to Jason and Mason, his sons, who had only ever known her as their guardian, their protector. The boys were staring at him now, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. Mason chewed at his bottom lip, Jason's fingers drumming anxiously on the arm of the chair. They weren't just waiting for his anger, they were waiting to see who he was. He exhaled, his shoulders deflating slightly. "You should have told me," he said again. But this time the words were softer, tinged with something closer to grief than fury. Violet's face remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Regret. "I know," she murmured. A thick silence stretched between them, the weight of 10 lost years sitting between Adam and the only family he had left. He ran a hand over his face, inhaling deeply before looking at the boys again. They were still watching him carefully, guarded but curious. Adam straightened, forcing the rawness in his voice to settle. "I don't expect you to understand what this means to me," he said, his gaze shifting between them. "But I need you to know. I would have wanted you. I should have been there." Jason and Mason didn't respond immediately, but something in their expressions softened. Violet shifted in her seat. "They need time, Adam. And so do you." Adam nodded slowly, the exhaustion suddenly weighing heavier than it had all night. Time. As if he hadn't already lost so much of it. His chest rose and fell in deep, uneven breaths. He wanted to scream at the bastards who wanted to hurt his son and wanted to rush out and demand someone come and arrest them. But then, Jason's small voice cut through the thick silence. "Grandma?" The boy's tone was careful and hesitant, and Adam turned to see him looking between Violet and himself. Jason's hands curled into the fabric of his pants, his dark eyes wide, with something vulnerable. Mason spoke next, his voice quieter but laced with something Adam couldn't quite place. "Is he really our dad?" Violet turned to them, and for the first time that evening, her face softened. "Yes," she murmured, nodding slowly. "He is." The words landed with a weight Adam wasn't prepared for. Jason and Mason stared at her for a moment, then turned to Adam. Something shifted in their expressions, something hesitant but yearning. Their faces were so familiar and yet so heartbreakingly foreign to him. Then, without another word, they moved. Jason reached him first, followed quickly by Mason, and before Adam could react, small arms wrapped around his middle, holding him tight. His breath caught. His arms hovered uncertainly for a moment before instinct took over, before years of longing, of loss, of grief, and of guilt collided into one overwhelming force. His hands found their way around their small frames, his grip tightening as he felt their warmth, their reality, their existence. Mason buried his face into Adam's chest, his fingers gripping the fabric of his jacket. Jason held on just as fiercely, as if afraid Adam might vanish if they let go. A deep tremor ran through Adam's body, but he didn't pull away. He held them, held onto them, as though anchoring himself to the moment, to the truth. His eyes burned, his throat constricting, But he didn't fight it. For the first time in a decade, he was holding his sons. Violet watched, her expression unreadable, her hands resting in her lap. The weight she had carried for 10 years seemed to ease just slightly as she witnessed the reunion she had feared would never happen. The room remained silent, save for the quiet, steady breathing of 3 people who had spent 10 years apart, but now, finally, were no longer lost to each other. The days that followed unraveled in slow, uncertain movements, as though time itself had grown hesitant. Adam returned to his sprawling mansion, but the space felt emptier than ever, the quiet pressing against him like a suffocating weight. He sat at his desk, the city lights flickering against the glass windows, but the papers before him remained untouched. Contracts, financial reports, legal memos, things that once commanded his full attention now felt inconsequential. His mind refused to focus on anything other than them, Jason and Mason. He had held them. He had felt their warmth, the way their small hands gripped onto him like he was something tangible, something real. That moment had shattered something inside him, replaced the hollow grief he had carried for a decade with something even more dangerous: hope. His fingers absently traced the edges of a photograph on his desk. Eleanor, a captured moment from years ago, her hair tousled by the wind, her laughter frozen in time, her eyes alight with something only she could carry. He had memorized every detail, but now, when he looked at her, he saw them. Jason's sharp gaze, Mason's soft, hesitant smile. Echoes of her in the boys he never knew existed. The house felt too large, too empty. The next morning, without fully understanding why, Adam found himself back in his car, the engine idling as he stared at the road ahead. He didn't tell his driver where he was going. He already knew. Back to Violet's house, back to where his sons were. At first, Jason and Mason were distant. They didn't push him away, but they didn't pull him in either. They observed him with wary eyes, their movements cautious. They knew he was their father, but he was still a stranger to them, a man who had appeared in their lives overnight with the weight of 10 missing years between them. So Adam let them lead. He didn't push. At breakfast, he sat at Violet's kitchen table, the smell of fresh toast and eggs filling the small space. The boys ate quietly, sneaking glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking. He noticed Mason stirring his juice with his spoon, lost in thought, and Jason picking at his food as if debating something unspoken. It wasn't much, but he was there, and that was something. Later that afternoon, Adam found Mason outside, crouched beside an old bicycle, his hands struggling to fix a loose chain. The boy gritted his teeth, frustration evident. "Need some help?" Adam asked, crouching beside him. Mason hesitated before nodding. Adam reached forward, his hands steady as he worked the chain back into place. Mason watched closely, his brows furrowing in concentration. When Adam finished, he wiped his hands against his slacks and gestured toward the bike. "Try it now." Mason climbed on, pushing forward tentatively. The pedals moved smoothly, the chain no longer catching. A slow smile spread across his face before he rode off, the hesitation melting away into something light, something free. Adam watched him go, his chest tightening. Such a small thing. But it mattered. Jason was different, more guarded, more observant. He watched Adam closely, as if waiting for him to reveal something hidden. One evening, while Violet busied herself in the kitchen, Jason sat on the floor near the coffee table, sketching quietly in a worn notebook. Adam glanced over, catching a glimpse of bold lines and shading. "You draw?" Jason nodded, but didn't look up. "What are you working on?" Adam asked carefully. For a moment, the boy hesitated, then turned the notebook around, revealing a pencil sketch of a man. It was him, The drawing was rough, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The sharp angles of his jaw, the furrow of his brow, the weight in his expression. Adam stared at it, something unreadable twisting inside him. "You're talented," he murmured. Jason didn't respond, but for the first time, he didn't look away. The days continued like this, slow steps forward, moments so small they barely seemed significant, yet they were. Each interaction, each conversation, was a thread weaving something fragile between them, something that wasn't quite father and son, but was beginning to resemble it. Adam wanted to claim them, to pull them into his world and never let them go. But fatherhood was something delicate, something he had never experienced. If he moved too fast, he could break what little they had just begun to build. So he waited. He let them come to him. And one night, when Mason casually leaned against his side while watching a show on the small television, or when Jason, without saying a word, slid his notebook toward him, as if silently asking for his opinion, Adam knew. They were letting him in, little by little, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel so alone. The mansion was dark except for the soft glow of his desk lamp. Adam sat there, fingers steepled under his chin, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His home, his kingdom, felt hollow now. The silence, which he had once found comforting, now pressed against him like an unbearable weight. Jason and Mason's faces lingered in his mind, the way they watched him, searching for something neither of them knew how to name yet. The way Mason's hesitant trust surfaced in small gestures. The way Jason's sharp gaze seemed to study him, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Adam wanted to give them time. He wanted to be patient, but something else gnawed at him, something he could not ignore. The truth. Violet had told him the story of that night, of Carl Rodriguez, and the unspeakable act that had stolen his sons from him. Adam had accepted her words, but acceptance wasn't enough. He needed proof. He needed to know who had orchestrated this nightmare and why. And he needed revenge. The thought of Carl Rodriguez walking free made Adam's blood run hot. A man who had discarded 2 helpless infants as though they were nothing. That man did not deserve to breathe. Adam reached for his phone and dialed a number. It rang only once before a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Patterson, I need you to find someone," Adam said, his voice low and firm. A pause, then, "Name?" "Dr. Carl Rodriguez." Another pause, then a slow exhale. "Understood. What am I looking for?" "Everything," Adam said. "Where he is, where he's been for the last 10 years, who he works for. And I want to know if anyone else was involved." There was a beat of silence, then, "I'll get back to you soon." Adam ended the call and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His mind was already working through the possibilities. Carl hadn't done this alone. Someone had paid him. Someone had wanted Eleanor and the children gone. And then, a name surfaced in his mind like a dark whisper from the past. Kimberly Cox. 2 days later, Adam sat in his study, his hands resting on the desk as he listened to the investigator's report over speakerphone. Carl Rodriguez left the country for a while after Eleanor's accident, the investigator said. Vanished for about 5 years. Then he resurfaced, Mexico, then South America. Kept a low profile but still practicing medicine under different aliases. About 3 years ago, he came back to the States. Small clinic in the outskirts of Chicago. Not exactly legal, but it seems like the authorities have been looking the other way. Adam's jaw clenched. He's been here all this time. Yes. And there's more. I traced his financials. 10 years ago, right after the accident, he received a large sum of money, 6 figures, wired through offshore accounts. Adam's fingers curled into his palm. Who paid him? A pause. Then, the answer Adam already knew was coming. Kimberly Cox. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adam closed his eyes briefly, pressing his thumb and forefinger against his temple. She was your assistant at the time of the accident, the investigator continued. Loyal, efficient, always nearby. But I did some digging, and it turns out she was doing a lot more than just managing your schedule. Adam's stomach twisted. Explain. She was obsessed with you. The investigator's voice was matter-of-fact, but Adam felt something cold settle in his chest. Not in a healthy way. I found old emails, ones she never sent, letters, journal entries. She kept track of everything you did, your routines, your meetings, even your meals. And she hated Eleanor. Adam's hands tightened into fists. She had access to your life, to your business, to your home. If she wanted Eleanor out of the picture, she had the opportunity and the means. Adam's breath came slow and controlled, but his pulse pounded in his ears. The money she paid Carl, the investigator continued, that wasn't just hush money. She paid him to make sure your children didn't survive. A cold fury spread through Adam's body, controlled but absolute. Kimberly, the woman who had stood beside him for years, who had carried his documents, arranged his meetings, and quietly watched him mourn his wife and children. She had been the one who stole them from him. The betrayal settled into his bones, deep and unforgiving. What do you want me to do? The investigator asked. Adam stared at the wall ahead, his mind working through every possible scenario. He had spent his life making decisions that built empires, crushing opponents without hesitation. This was no different. Find Carl, he said evenly. I want to talk to him myself. And Kimberly. Adam's fingers tapped slowly against the desk. She still works for me, he murmured, more to himself than to the investigator. He had seen her just last week, smiling in meetings, standing by his side as she always had. How many times had she looked him in the eye, knowing what she had done? A slow, bitter smile curved his lips. She doesn't know I know. The investigator was silent, then understood. The call ended. Adam sat back, staring out at the city beyond his windows. For 10 years, he had lived in ignorance. Grief had blinded him to the truth. But now, he had clarity. Kimberly thought she had won. She thought she had erased Eleanor and his children from his life, securing herself as the only one left standing. She had no idea her time was running out. The world outside moved in slow, deliberate motions, the city lights casting fragmented reflections on the windshield as Adam's car weaved through the quiet streets. His mind, however, was anything but calm. The weight of the investigator's findings pressed against his chest like a stone, suffocating, inescapable. Kimberly. Her name had once meant loyalty, competence, stability. Now, it was a sickness he couldn't shake. Every interaction with her over the past decade replayed in his mind, tainted by what he now knew. She had stood beside him, pretending to grieve, offering comfort when he lost Eleanor and the children she had ensured would never survive. His stomach churned. The betrayal was absolute. The investigator's report sat on the seat beside him, the contents burned into his memory. The first accident report had been altered. The original, filed within hours of Eleanor's crash, had clearly stated brake failure. The second, the official version, erased that detail entirely, reducing it to an unfortunate, tragic accident. The kind no one questioned. And the money, a 6-figure transfer to Carl Rodriguez right before the hospital declared Eleanor and the twins dead. Kimberly had paid him, not to cover up a mistake, but to finish the job. Adam's jaw clenched, as he turned onto a quieter road, the distant hum of the city fading behind him. She murdered Eleanor. The words echoed in his skull, hollow and final. And now, she was still right there, sitting in the same office, pretending to be his most trusted advisor, watching his every move. The thought sent a shudder of fury down his spine, his grip tightening around the wheel. He could have confronted her, could have stormed into the office, thrown the files in her face, watched her composure crack as she realized he knew. But this wasn't about rage. Not yet. This was about patience. Kimberly had spent 10 years planning, manipulating, covering her tracks. If he made a move too soon, she would be gone before he could ruin her. And he would ruin her. But tonight, his war wasn't with her. Not yet. What day did you hear this story? Leave your information in the comments below. Maybe someone will agree with you. Tonight, he was going to see his sons. The streets grew quieter as he neared Violet's home, the houses smaller, more worn, a stark contrast to the sleek modern world he had built for himself. He pulled into the familiar driveway and turned off the engine, exhaling slowly before stepping out. The house was dimly lit, the front porch light casting long shadows over the wooden steps. Adam hesitated for a moment, listening. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Then, the door opened slightly. Violet stood there, wrapped in a thin cardigan, her gaze sharp and knowing as she studied him. "You're late," she murmured. Adam sighed, running a hand over his face. "I know." She stepped aside, letting him in. The warmth of the house was immediate, the faint scent of chamomile tea lingering in the air. He glanced toward the small couch, where Jason and Mason lay, curled up under a blanket, fast asleep. Their quiet, steady breathing filled the space between them. Something in Adam's chest tightened. They looked so small, so peaceful, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf their world. Violet followed his gaze. "They waited for you," she said quietly. "But they had a long day." Adam nodded, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. "I didn't want to wake them." Violet watched him for a long moment, then gestured toward the kitchen. "Come, let's talk." He followed her without a word, settling into one of the worn wooden chairs as she poured them both tea. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken things. Finally, Violet spoke. "You found something, didn't you?" Adam met her gaze, his hands curling around the ceramic mug, "More than I wanted to." Violet sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I had a feeling this wasn't over." Adam's jaw tightened. Kimberly, she wasn't just involved, she orchestrated it. She paid Carl. She had the accident report changed. She made sure Eleanor wouldn't survive. His voice was low, but the rage beneath it was unmistakable. Violet exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around her own cup. "And now she's still working for you?" Adam gave a slow, bitter nod. "She doesn't know I know." Violet studied him, her sharp eyes searching his face. "So, what now?" Adam didn't hesitate. "I destroy her." A flicker of something crossed Violet's face, concern perhaps, or something deeper. She set her cup down with a quiet clink. "Adam, be careful." His brow furrowed. Violet leaned forward slightly, her voice quieter but firm. "I know you want justice, and you deserve it. But Kimberly has spent 10 years covering her tracks. She's smart. She's dangerous. You can't go at this like a man chasing revenge." Adam exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "What do you suggest? That I let her walk free?" "No," Violet said simply, "but you have something to lose now." His gaze flickered toward the living room, toward the two small figures curled up on the couch. Violet followed his gaze. "She took 10 years," from you, Adam. Don't let her take any more." He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. For the first time in years, he had something worth protecting, and he wouldn't let Kimberly take them away. Not again. The wind howled through the city streets as Adam stepped out of his car, the cold biting through his coat. The address the investigator had provided led him to a crumbling clinic on the outskirts of Chicago, tucked away in a neighborhood where no one asked questions. Carl Rodriguez was here. The investigator had confirmed it. After years of hiding, moving between countries, changing his name, Carl had finally grown complacent. A man like him, once desperate to erase his sins, had eventually convinced himself that no one was looking anymore, that no one cared. But Adam Patterson cared. Adam pulled his coat tighter around him as he approached the clinic's entrance, his footsteps purposeful, steady. The investigator had offered to come along, but Adam had refused. This was his confrontation, his reckoning. He pushed open the door. Inside, the clinic was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzing faintly. The waiting area was nearly empty, just a few chairs, old magazines scattered on a chipped wooden table. A woman at the reception desk glanced up but didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew why he was here. Adam walked past her, his steps echoing down the narrow hallway. At the end of the corridor, a single door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Carl Rodriguez was seated at a desk, hunched over paperwork, a pair of reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked older, more worn, but Adam recognized him instantly. The same man who had declared his wife and unborn children dead. Carl looked up, his pen stilled, his breath caught. Then, recognition flickered across his face, followed swiftly by fear. Adam stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sent a ripple of tension through the room. Carl exhaled shakily, forcing an unconvincing smile. "Mr. Patterson, this is a surprise." Adam didn't return the courtesy. He took a slow step forward. "I'm sure it is." Carl's hand twitched toward his desk drawer, but Adam's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't!" The doctor's fingers stilled. Adam took another step forward, his voice measured, calm, but beneath it was a quiet storm. "You know why I'm here." Carl swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Don't lie to me." Adam's voice was sharp, slicing through the room's stale air. Carl flinched, his hand retreating from the desk drawer. He sat back, exhaling shakily. "Look, Kimberly paid you," Adam interrupted. "A 6-figure sum, right before Eleanor's accident, right before you smuggled my sons out of that hospital like garbage." Carl paled, his fingers tightening around the armrests of his chair. Adam took another step forward. "You buried them, Rodriguez." His voice was quieter now, but it carried the full weight of his fury. "You left them in the dirt. You thought they would die, and you walked away." Carl's breathing grew uneven. I didn't have a choice." Adam's hand slammed down on the desk, making Carl jump. "You had a choice," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You made the wrong one." Carl's lips trembled, but Adam wasn't finished. "I know everything, Carl. I have the records. I have Violet. I have your bank transfers. And I have enough to make sure you spend the rest of your life rotting in a cell." Carl's breathing turned ragged. He knew Adam wasn't bluffing. "Now," Adam said, straightening, "here's how this is going to go." Carl swallowed, his gaze darting toward the door as if calculating his chances. But Adam blocked his path. "You're going to confess," Adam said, voice even. "You're going to turn yourself in, and you're going to tell them everything. About Kimberly, about the accident, about the cover-up. Every last detail." Carl shook his head rapidly. I can't. Adam leaned down, lowering his voice to something almost gentle, something terrifying. If you don't, he murmured, I will bury you in a way that makes what you did to my sons look like mercy. Carl stilled. Adam straightened, stepping back. Those are your options. Carl's breath came in shallow bursts. He was trapped. There was no escaping this. He saw it now. Adam turned to leave, but before he stepped out, he glanced back. You've spent 10 years running, he said. Now, it's time to pay. And then, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Carl Rodriguez alone, his fate already sealed. The air in Adam's office was still, heavy with the anticipation of something inevitable. The cityscape beyond the towering windows stretched in restless motion, cars flickering in and out of sight. But inside, everything had gone quiet. He sat at his desk, his fingers drumming idly against the polished wood, his mind razor-sharp despite the calm facade. Kimberly would be here soon. She had no idea what was waiting for her. A knock at the door. Sir, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Cox is here. Adam inhaled deeply, steadying himself. This is it. Send her in. The door swung open and Kimberly stepped inside, her usual self-assurance wrapped around her like armor. She was dressed immaculately, a designer suit tailored to perfection, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She smiled as she approached his desk, completely oblivious. You wanted to see me, Adam? Her voice was smooth, casual, as if they were about to discuss quarterly reports. Adam didn't stand, didn't motion for her to sit. Instead, he leaned back slightly, letting his gaze settle on her with unnerving patience. Yes, he said evenly. Take a seat. Kimberly hesitated for half a second, barely noticeable, then did as he said. What's this about? Adam took his time, studying her like she was a puzzle he was about to dismantle. Then, he slid a folder across the desk. She glanced at it, then back at him, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face before she reached for it. The moment her eyes landed on the first document, her posture stiffened. The color in her face didn't drain all at once, but Adam could see it happening in real time, like a slow leak in a foundation that was about to collapse. The original accident report, the one that mentioned brake failure. Her fingers tightened around the paper as she flipped to the next page. A bank statement, a 6-figure transfer to Carl Rodriguez. She didn't move on to the next document. Silence stretched between them. Adam watched her, unflinching, as the realization dawned. Kimberly's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then, she did what Adam expected. She laughed, a soft, almost amused chuckle at first, then a smirk. This is what you called me in for, she said, shaking her head. Come on, Adam. Are we really doing this? Adam remained silent. Kimberly leaned forward, her smirk unwavering. Look, I don't know what you think you found, but you should be careful throwing around accusations. A 10-year-old accident? That's reaching, even for you. Still, Adam said nothing. She kept going, her voice measured, calculated. Do you really want to start a war with me, after everything I've done for you? Adam exhaled slowly, tilting his head slightly. Then, he picked up a small remote from his desk and pressed play. The room filled with Carl's voice. Kimberly orchestrated everything. She paid me to make sure Eleanor didn't make it out of that accident. She bribed officers to change the report. She told me to get rid of the kids. Said Adam would never find out. Kimberly froze. The tape played on, but she wasn't listening anymore. Her hand clenched into a fist against her lap, the once confident smirk vanishing into something closer to panic. Adam let the words sink in before pausing the recording. Then finally, he spoke. You killed my wife." Kimberly's breath hitched, but she recovered quickly. She straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. This is ridiculous," she scoffed. "You think a recording from some washed-up doctor is enough to—" Adam pulled another folder from his desk. This one he opened for her. Inside were photographs, emails, transaction records, everything. Kimberly stared. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, her mask shattered. "You—" Her voice wavered, eyes darting to the office door. She was thinking, calculating, looking for an escape. Adam leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerously low. "You took my family from me. You made me mourn children who were still breathing." Kimberly stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. But before she could take another step, the door swung open. 2 uniformed officers entered, their presence final. Kimberly's head snapped toward Adam, pure fury flashing across her face. "You called the cops on me?" Adam simply leaned back in his chair. "I did more than that." The officers stepped forward. "Kimberly Cox," one of them announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, and multiple counts of fraud." Kimberly laughed again, but this time it was hollow. She shook her head, disbelief contorting her features. "You think this is over?" Her voice dripped venom as they pulled her hands behind her back, locking the cuffs into place. She turned to Adam, her expression twisted with hatred. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Adam stood, adjusting his cufflinks, as he finally looked her in the eye. "Neither did you." The officers guided her toward the door. Kimberly resisted, twisting her neck to spit her final words at Adam. "I was the only one who ever truly cared about you. You'll regret this." Adam tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then he simply turned away. The last thing he heard was the sound of her footsteps, fading into the hallway, the doors clicking shut behind her. And just like that, it was over. The late afternoon sun streamed through the mansion's towering windows, casting long golden beams across the polished floors. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh linens and the faint aroma of dinner cooking in the kitchen. Adam stood in the hallway, his hands in his pockets, listening to the unmistakable sound of laughter. It had been years since he had heard anything like it inside these walls. Jason and Mason raced through the living room, their small feet padding across the rug as they chased each other, weaving around furniture in their own little world. Jason was faster, but Mason was persistent, his determination evident in every sharp turn. Adam leaned against the staircase railing, watching them with quiet awe. Just months ago, he had been a man drowning in the echoes of the past, his life dictated by loss and revenge. Now this house was full of life again. A feeling settled deep in his chest, one that was unfamiliar, yet unmistakable. Contentment. Jason was the first to notice him standing there. He slowed, nudging Mason to stop as well. The boys exchanged a glance, before turning toward Adam, their expressions still carrying a trace of hesitation, as if they weren't sure how to act around him yet. Adam pushed off the railing, taking a step forward. "Dinner's almost ready." Jason gave a small nod, and Mason, after a moment's pause, mimicked his brother. Then, without another word, they turned and ran toward the dining room, their footsteps echoing through the halls. Adam exhaled slowly. It was small, but it was progress. The adoption had been finalized that morning. Jason and Mason were officially his sons, not just by blood, but by law, by name, by choice. The moment had been quieter than he had expected. No grand speeches, no dramatic revelations, just a few signatures, a judge's nod, and it was done. But the weight of it lingered in his chest, heavier than he had anticipated. They were his now, forever. And Violet. She had moved into the mansion as well. It wasn't something they had discussed in length, but it had never really been a question. She had saved his sons, protected them when the world had abandoned them. She belonged here. Adam found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, the rich scent of soup filling the air. She turned slightly, catching him watching her. "You're staring," she said, raising an eyebrow. Adam smirked, crossing his arms. "Still getting used to this." Violet chuckled, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Well, get used to it. This is your life now." His life. For years, he had existed in a void, an empty house, an empty routine, an empty purpose. Now, his home had toys scattered across the floor, sketches on the coffee table, a soccer ball by the front door. Now, his life had meaning again. Violet's expression softened. "Are you happy, Adam?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because happiness had once felt impossible. His gaze drifted toward the dining room, where Jason and Mason were setting the table, bickering over who got to place the forks. He thought about the small moments, the way Mason leaned into his side when they watched TV, the way Jason had started showing him his drawings, the way they no longer flinched when he entered a room. He thought about the nights he had spent alone in this house, drowning in grief. And then he thought about now. Adam turned back to Violet and nodded. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." That night, they all sat down for dinner together. It was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, nothing grand. But to Adam, it was everything. Jason and Mason sat across from him, their plates full, their movements natural. Mason was talking animatedly about something that had happened earlier that day, his hands waving excitedly, while Jason listened, occasionally rolling his eyes, but never truly annoyed. Adam watched them, taking it all in. At one point, Mason accidentally knocked over his glass of water. He froze, his eyes darting to Adam, his small hands gripping the table as if preparing for punishment. Adam simply grabbed a napkin and handed it to him. "No big deal," he said, his voice even. "Just clean it up." Mason blinked. Then, slowly, he took the napkin and started dabbing at the spill. Jason watched the exchange, something unreadable flickering across his face before he returned to his meal. Another small moment. Another step forward. As the night stretched on, the house no longer felt like a relic of the past. It was warm. It was alive. And for the first time in 10 years, Adam Patterson was no longer alone. The evening air was crisp as Adam stepped out of his car, his shoes pressing softly against the damp earth. The sky had begun to darken, casting long shadows across the cemetery, where rows of gravestones stretched into the distance. A few visitors lingered, their figures blurred in the fading light, but in this quiet corner, it was just them. Jason and Mason climbed out after him, their usual chatter subdued. They had never been here before, never stood before the grave of the woman who had given them life. Adam walked ahead, leading them along the winding path, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, the only sound breaking the silence. Then they reached her. Eleanor Patterson. The name was carved into the smooth marble, the letters bold, yet softened by time. Below it, the date of her passing, 10 years ago today. Adam stopped, exhaling slowly. He knelt, reaching into the paper-wrapped bundle he had brought with him. Carefully, he placed 3 roses in front of the headstone, one for Eleanor, one for Jason, one for Mason. The petals shifted slightly in the evening breeze. The boys stood beside him, their expressions unreadable. Jason's hands were tucked into his hoodie pockets, his gaze locked onto the name in the stone. Mason shifted his weight between his feet, as if unsure whether to step forward or stay where he was. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Adam rested his hand on the top of the headstone, his fingers tracing the carved letters. "Your mother would have loved you both," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was an ache beneath the words. "More than anything." Jason looked down at the flowers, his lips pressed together. "Did she know about us?" His voice was softer than usual, cautious, as if afraid of the answer. Adam swallowed, the weight of memory settling deep in his chest. "Yes," he said. "She knew. She was waiting for you." Mason took a slow step forward, staring at the stone with wide eyes. What was she like? Adam let out a breath, his fingers lingering on the cold marble. "She was kind," he said, "and strong, and stubborn when she wanted to be." His lips quirked slightly. "She would have done anything to protect you." Jason's brow furrowed. "Then why didn't she?" The words hit harder than they should have, but Adam didn't flinch. He turned to Jason, meeting his gaze. "She tried," he said. "She fought harder than anyone I've ever known." He paused, his voice softening. "She just never got the chance." Jason's fingers curled around the edges of his hoodie sleeves. He gave a small nod, but he didn't say anything else. Mason crouched down beside the flowers, running his fingers lightly over the delicate petals. "I wish we could have met her," he murmured. Adam felt a tightness in his throat. "Me too." The wind stirred around them, rustling the grass, carrying with it something Adam couldn't quite name. For 10 years, he had come here alone, burdened with guilt, anger, and sorrow. But this time, standing beside his sons, it felt different. The loss was still there, but it no longer consumed him. The past would always be a part of them. But now, they had a future. Jason and Mason stood there a moment longer, then, as if sensing the moment had passed, they ran. They took off down the path, their laughter breaking the stillness of the cemetery. Their voices, their energy, their life. It echoed through the air, filling the spaces that had once been empty. Adam remained where he was, watching them. The sight of them, so full of movement and joy, was a stark contrast to the stillness that had ruled his life for so long. For years, he had been a man trapped in grief, his world frozen in the moment Eleanor was taken from him. But now, in the space she had left behind, something new had grown. Family. Adam took one last look at the grave, then turned, following his sons toward the car. As they reached the parking lot, Mason skidded to a stop, breathless and grinning. "Race you home," he called, nudging Jason with his elbow. Jason rolled his eyes but smirked. "You'll lose." Before Adam could say anything, they bolted toward the car, their laughter carried by the wind. He watched them, a small smile touching his lips. For the first time in 10 years, he was whole again. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.